Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around and being here. Really great to see some friendly faces in the audience. I am so honored to be here in London, attending Cannabis Europa. It's been such an amazing couple days already. Incredibly honored to be on the stage with these experts. We have got Dr. Laura Garius from Released UK. We have Denzel Uba, who's an impacted individual. You'll hear a little bit about his story in a bit. And my dear colleague, Norman Reamer, Global CEO of Fair Trials, which is a locally based nonprofit organization. My name is Mary Bailey. I serve as the Managing Director of Last Prisoner Project. We're a US-based criminal justice reform nonprofit absolutely dedicated to releasing cannabis prisoners and helping them rebuild their lives. Sadly, there are thousands, tens of thousands of cannabis prisoners all over the globe. Sadly, the US, where I'm from, has the most by far, but that problem is not just in the US. There's definitely many cannabis prisoners in different countries around the globe. So, luckily, thank goodness, I work with literally hundreds of cannabis companies based in the US who have stepped up to the plate to help us fund this project to release cannabis prisoners. It's been an incredible ride, the 3 years of Last Prisoner Project. We work with many celebrities that you might recognize, such as Willie Nelson, Cheech and Chong, classic stoners. But we also work with artists such as Jim Belushi, Damien, and Stephen Marley, and the list goes on. It's been really great working with the celebrities because basically they help use their platform, they leverage their platform to educate the public, which has been very helpful. But thanks to the cannabis companies that we work with because they actually help to fund it. What we found by working with cannabis companies, focusing on corporate social responsibility, as there are corporate perks. It's really a win-win for everybody. Not only are the cannabis companies really helping to support the work that we're doing, but they really see that it is really positive in other aspects of their business. It's actually good for business. They really get notoriety from customers. People vote with their dollar. They're apt to buy products from cannabis companies that are actually donating towards social good, as well as the moral, it's really what I see as employees. It's good for morale of the employees, of their staff. They're really proud to work for a company that gives back and helps society directly through cannabis prisoner release efforts. So the next, we'll talk about a little bit. So what do we do at Last Prisoner Project? Our big focus, of course, release. So we've created back at the beginning, I actually worked with Norman Reamer when he worked for National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I call them our army of attorneys. They have pro bono attorneys in all 50 states of the US. We work with the pro bono attorneys. We match them with currently incarcerated cannabis prisoners to help them file their clemency petitions and compassionate release petitions. It's been incredibly successful. It really is, most of these folks do not have the means to hire their own attorneys. So working with attorneys in this way has been very positive. And it's actually, again, a win-win because for these attorneys, most of them do not work in criminal justice. Most of them are contractual attorneys, all across the board. But for them to be able to work with social justice, it feels good. It's soul work. So again, it's not just a bonus for the prisoners to have this legal counsel. It feels good for the counsel and the attorneys who are doing the work. So in addition to, of course, the legal support we offer, we also have reentry support. So we can't just work to help release cannabis prisoners and expect their lives to go back to normal. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. Recidivism rates in America are incredibly high. So we have created a reentry resource program. Basically, we did a needs assessment. What do people need? People need funding. Getting your life back on track when you have felony cannabis offenses on your record, the collateral consequences of a cannabis offense run deep. Not only have you been separated from your family members and you're rebuilding those familial bonds, so on the emotional level, you're also dealing with so many other hurdles, such as having having cannabis offenses on your record. It can affect employment. It can affect being able to get student loans, government assistance. The list goes on. It can affect your immigration status. So, for example, one of our constituents was originally from Jamaica, but spent 13 years incarcerated in the US for a nonviolent cannabis offense. And as soon as she was released, she was immediately taken into ICE custody. And after several months, then she was deported back to Jamaica. She had not lived in Jamaica for 35 years. Her children, her grown children, were all still living in the US. So she's been rebuilding her life in the country of Jamaica, where she really doesn't have any family there. So all of this is, it's a lot for people to rise above. I also feel it's really important to note that we as an organization feel really strongly that anybody who has been or is currently incarcerated for cannabis, we view them as the pioneers of this booming industry. It's incredibly important that they're viewed as such. They're actually victims of unjust laws. So it's important to really note that as well. Also, one last thing regarding our reentry resource program, I'm happy to announce that we've actually allocated or dispersed $1.5 million in grants to impacted families. These are through grants for returning citizens to help them get back on their feet once they do regain their much-deserved freedom. These are also grants for folks who are currently incarcerated. Most of them are parents, so their children on the outside and their caretakers are also eligible for our grants. We also put funding onto the commissary accounts of currently incarcerated prisoners. Next slide. We can't just talk about the problem and not talk about some success stories, right? It just feels good to know that the work is working. So the first photo is Richard DeLisi. Richard is, he's such a character, and he's really thriving. He was originally sentenced to a 99-year prison sentence, a life sentence. For a nonviolent cannabis crime, it was actually a conspiracy charge, which means that he was not caught with any cannabis. It was a conspiracy to distribute cannabis. Luckily, he was finally released last January. He's now thriving and living in Florida. He actually just last month launched his own cannabis brand called Delicioso with the multi-state operator TrueLeaf in the state of Florida. Within the first 10 minutes of sales, all of their stores were completely sold out of his product. And now every time they're releasing it, again, they don't stay on the shelves very long. So it's just really great to see him thriving now. Next up, we've got Michael Thompson. Michael received a 40 to 60 year sentence for only 3 pounds of cannabis in the state of Michigan. We worked on his release campaign for about a year and a half. Many celebrities used their platform to advocate for his release, including Kim Kardashian, comedian Chelsea Handler. The list goes on and on. B-Real from Cypress Hill. And luckily, finally, it was a successful campaign. Governor Whitmer put out an executive commutation for him, and he was released also last January. He is now, again, thriving. He serves as an ambassador to several large cannabis companies. We did a fundraising campaign with the U.S. activist Sean King. Within 24 hours, his GoFundMe campaign raised $250,000. 24 hours. He was able to buy a new house to live in and a vehicle. So it really helped set him up for success in his golden years. I do want to say, too, before he was incarcerated with his 46-year sentence, nonviolent sentence, he was a pillar of his community. He lived in Flint, Michigan, and he actually worked with troubled youth. He did workshops with troubled youth to lower the violence in his area. And he received the keys to the city of Flint the year before he received that 40 to 60-year sentence. So he was actually, he was doing really good work in his area. And the fact that he still received this archaic sentence is just such a travesty. Next up, we've got Corvain Cooper. Corvain also received a life sentence for conspiracy to distribute cannabis. He served 8 years of that sentence, and he was released last year. He's the father of 2 daughters. I literally picked him up from the airport and drove him to meet his daughters. I was the one that took this photo of him. I can tell you guys, there is literally no feeling in the world from seeing family members reunite. It's truly beautiful, and I hope that I keep getting to see families being reunited because there's a lot of people behind the bars. I really invite you guys, this is actually an invitation for all of you to be involved with something that's much bigger than ourselves. The fact that there are still so many people incarcerated globally for cannabis is something that we should all, in the legal cannabis industry, we should feel a moral imperative to help these people and fight for their freedom. It's not okay to take this issue sitting down. If we are in the legal industry, this legal industry would not exist if it were not for the people who came before us. So we have to work together to fight for their freedom. Thanks to the amazing folks at Fair Trials, which is a UK-based organization, they are replicating the programs that we've built in the US with Last Prisoner Project, and they are working towards building a foundation to be able to do this release work globally in as many countries as we can. But first, we really have to create the possibility of doing that. That's where all of you come in as global leaders in the cannabis industry. We are hosting a reception after this talk. We'd love to meet you, explain how you can work with us on this effort. But first, you're gonna hear from some other experts. So next up, I'm really excited for Dr. Laura Garius to share a little bit of her studies from Release UK.
Thank you very much, Mary. Tough act to follow. So I am Laura Garius from Release. Release, we had a wonderful shout out from Professor Carl Hart, is the oldest drugs charity in the world. We were founded in 1967. And for decades, our work has revolved around bringing awareness and lobbying the racially disparate policing and sentencing of drug offences, in particular cannabis offences. I haven't got time to go into all of our previous work, but I do implore you to go to our website, release.org.uk, and have a look at some of our previous work. But what is a current theme throughout everything that we do is we see that the drug law is imposed most harshly against ethnic minority groups, despite the prevalence of drug use among those groups being no higher than among the white population. So we are seeing a completely unjustified surveillance and monitoring and punishment of people from black and brown communities in the name of these drug laws. And as we heard this morning in the great panel involving Kojo Karam, can't see you, but it is cannabis that is driving this injustice in particular. So across the world, so the UK and beyond, cannabis is the drug that brings the largest number of people into contact with the criminal justice system. And for the vast majority of those cases, it's low-level drug possession. In England and Wales, for example, 80% of recorded drug offences are low-level personal possession offences. I'm preaching to the choir here, but our current policies in the UK, where cannabis is a Class B substance, can attract up to 5 years imprisonment for possession alone, does not reflect the relative harm of that substance. And we know that these policies were actually born out of fears and desires to punish people based on who is perceived to use drugs and not in relation to that, the evidence harm of those drugs at all. what we're seeing 50 years after the Misuse of Drugs Act in 1971 in the UK and the start of Nixon's war on drugs in the US, of course, a lot of parallels there. What we're seeing 50 years later is that still to this day in the UK and beyond, cannabis policing and sentencing are racially and socially disparate. And it's driving inequality in our justice system as well. We heard in the panel this morning that in England and Wales, black people are 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs, despite prevalence being no higher than the white population. In terms of sentencing, black individuals are 12 times more likely to be convicted for cannabis possession than white individuals, and Asian individuals are twice as likely than white individuals. What is adding insult to injury is that the criminalisation of cannabis is the gateway. Cannabis isn't the gateway, it's the criminalisation of cannabis possession that is the gateway into further drug use and further offending. And that is because of the disruption to life's opportunities, the disruption to education, the disruption to family relationships that a young individual, for the most part, who encounters the criminal justice system because of cannabis possession faces. Again, we all know in this room, I'm sure, that prohibition is a costly and very harmful failure. It costs the UK 1.4 billion per annum to enforce these drug laws alone, the majority of which are enforcing the cannabis laws and cannabis offences. But is there hope on the horizon? Could we see the legalisation and regulation of adult recreational cannabis in the UK? Perhaps we could, because we know that the public support, that needle has shifted, and the majority, over 50%, are in favour in Britain of cannabis reform, for recreational cannabis reform. We are seeing amazing change across the world, of course, including our European neighbours, and Germany has obviously been a big topic at this conference, which is really exciting to hear more about. But what I'm here to talk about, and this panel is focused on, is that really there can be no sensible debate about legalisation until we accept the racialised nature of this drug policy and of the war on cannabis. And that's what our kind of recent policy paper focuses on, so please do have a look again. It's called Regulating Right, Repairing Wrongs on Release's website. But I've got a couple of minutes to tell you some of our kind of key findings. Now, the only benefit of the UK being so slow in this kind of progress is that we've been able to see other jurisdictions who have made that leap with reform, and we can learn lessons about positive aspects and negative aspects. Let's take Canada very quickly as an example. So Canada, world leader, second country only to Uruguay to legalise every element of the supply chain of cannabis. But social equity and reform were inadequate. They were afterthoughts in that process. What happened as a result? We had allocation lotteries. So people had to have access to hundreds and thousands of pounds, dollars even, to be able to participate. That limits participation. It led to undersupply, sluggish rollouts of retail stores. And what we see is that cannabis is cheaper and often more available on the illicit or the legacy market. But what was terrible in Canada is that the penalties still remain. So this is why we need decriminalisation. We need to end criminal sanctions for cannabis use, no matter its origins. And we can talk about that in the after session if you have different views. In the US, they obviously got to see the experience of Canada, and there are some amazing things happening across America, not least what Mary was describing with the Last Prisoner Project. But to be very brief, some amazing social equity programs include, in Sacramento, they are extending those social equity programs to family members of those convicted for cannabis offences because they understand the transgenerational impact that that can have. Illinois is automatically expunging records ahead of schedule. Massachusetts, who originated the social equity program, is supporting ethnic minority groups into the industry through training and grants. And New York, one of the most recent but one of the most progressive US states, has committed to reinvest 40% of the tax revenue into communities who have been over-policed and issue 50% of cannabis licenses to social equity applicants. Amazing stuff. So what we need you to do as industry players with amazing expertise, knowledge, power, influence, is to advocate for and facilitate responsible regulation in the UK, Europe and beyond. We need regulation that prevents displacement in cannabis policing. Because what I failed to mention very quickly is one example of where we can trip up is in Colorado. I have cherry-picked Colorado, but what we did see there is after legalization, the arrests for underage cannabis use increased for black and Hispanic youths, but decreased for white youths. We also saw that arrests post-legalization for public cannabis use, the smoking of cannabis in public, remained extremely racially disparate. So, back to my point very quickly, we need regulation that prevents that kind of displacement. We need to wipe the slate clean for those with criminal records and demand automatic prison release. We need a social equity-led framework that doesn't put industry interests at the forefront, as important as the industry pressures and influence is. We need a racially inclusive industry overseen by a dedicated board. We can't whitewash an industry that has disproportionately disrupted communities of colour. We need to transition illicit supplies to the licit market. We heard Big Nasty yesterday talk about Gary in his loft. If you were there, you'll get it. If you weren't, you'll think, what am I talking about? But we need to transition those people who've been working in this industry into that legal market if they would like to be there, and redistribute the wealth we know will be gained by this reform and reinvest into those communities. We have 14 principles. Please go and read them. And I want to end on this amazing quote from Crystal D. Peoples-Stokes, who spoke on the New York Assembly floor, to say equity is not a second thought, it's the first one, and it needs to be. The people who paid the price for this war on drugs have lost so much. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Denzel Uba, who is someone who has paid the price for these outdated and historic and barbaric cannabis laws in the UK. So please welcome Denzel Uba.
Evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm on this panel today, this lovely panel, to provide an insight into the ramifications I faced when I was arrested for supplying cannabis, and what I had to go through to reintegrate myself back into society. Statistics show that the number of individuals incarcerated in the UK is monumentally higher than any other country in Western Europe. Of course, this is not a statistic to brag or boast about, because ideally we would like to decrease this incarceration rate, right? Therefore, leading towards the slogan of the day, leave no cannabis prisoner behind. My name is Denzel Uba, as stated before. I'm 27 years of age. I grew up in Botley, Lewisham in South East London with my mother and two younger sisters on the Honoric estate. I attended primary school in Botley, secondary school in Downham, college in Lewisham, and university in Northampton, ironically studying criminology. My mother, a hard-working single mother of three, most definitely tried her best to ensure that my siblings and I did not lack the fundamental necessities of life, the reason for the profound respect I always have for her. With this burden constantly on my mother's shoulders, I felt it was my duty as the eldest to alleviate this burden. So, of course, I've done what you would, go out looking for jobs, but employment wasn't easy to attain. So I started to sell cannabis to be self-sufficient. Inevitably, this led into run-ins with the law. I was convicted for supplying cannabis in 2019, in which I served 14 months in custody, right opposite the notorious Belmarsh prison in HMP Thameside. This was a significant amount of time. However, this situation could have taken a turn for the worse, as the original charge placed against me was actually conspiracy to supply cannabis, which entails, of course, a hefty sentence. Release provided an expert report from Gary Sutton, which was instrumental in getting my basis of plea accepted, therefore keeping my sentence down. I express total gratitude to Release and the late Gary Sutton. My barrister, Arlette Piercy, who is also the individual who introduced me to this fabulous event, won this trial for me with her incredible skills in the courtroom. I express the utmost gratitude to her. My time in incarceration, as you can guess, was not pleasant. Deriving from a close-knit family, my mother, two younger sisters, and I always maintained a good level of communication. So it was an incredibly hard pill to swallow for all members of the family. My girlfriend was also massively affected by the situation, because, of course, we spoke and saw each other frequently. The prison visits provided a sense of consolation in the circumstance. However, when visits were banned for 6 months due to the COVID-19 crisis, the anxiety my family, girlfriend, and I felt was accentuated. With all the noise, disruptions, and fights present, of course, in prison, reading and learning is what kept me focused in a volatile environment. Time in custody was far from a walk in the park. Lack of peace, structured food regimes, structured daily routines, and of course, minimal time outside of the cell, especially during the 23-hour bang-up session during the COVID-19 crisis, can sap the innovation and life out of you. I was eventually released, and the primary thought in my mind was to attain some sort of employment. As expected, I was rejected on multiple occasions due to failing the DBS checks. This really affected my morale, but I almost lost hope. However, possessing the resilience I hold, I never gave up and eventually attained a job at Country Style Recycling, which provided me with the foundation to start the mobile car valeting business I possess today. My observation of my environment while incarcerated led to the question, just how competent is the criminal justice system in reducing the volume of prisoners serving custodial sentences, as well as reducing the rates of recidivism? A question sparked by myself feeling some sort of out of place, some sort, only because at the end of the day, I did commit a crime, so I was guilty, but some sort, on the contrary, as well, because the punishment for the crime just far outweighed the cause of the crime. At the end of the day, I was in prison locked up with people for violent offences, GBH, attempted murder, and murder. If you're caught selling cannabis, these are the individuals you could potentially be banged up with and sharing a cell with. And I'm not saying this to, tarnish the character of these individuals. I'm only emphasising this point to raise the point that someone who's involved in such minuscule crime, such a minuscule criminal career path, could end up being influenced into a hardcore career path by liaising with people who actually live the life of crime. After all, is incarcerating individuals, especially young black males, for cannabis the right way? I saw for myself the volume of young black males inducted into the prison system for cannabis-related offences. The UK statistically has more people in custody than all other countries in Western Europe. If our aim is to make an impact on this appalling statistic, please, let's leave no cannabis prisoner behind. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of this wonderful event, and I'm open to questions after. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Norman Reamer. I'm the CEO of Fair Trials. Mary mentioned our organization, and we are a global criminal justice watchdog organization. And what we have been watching for the past 30 years of our existence has been the tyranny of the war on drugs. And Mary spoke about the moral imperative, about the need to get relief for people who are still suffering from this. And I think that that's probably an understatement. When I listened to Dr. Hart say the war on drugs worked, I couldn't agree more. It worked not just because it created a lot of jobs. It worked because it was designed to oppress people, mostly minorities. Every statistic in every country that's been looked at by groups like Release, like Fair Trials, like the group I used to work for in the United States, has found that there is a disproportionate way in which the law is enforced in sentencing and in the way in which these cases are handled. And that's not to say that there aren't a lot of people from majority groups who have also been tyrannized by this. I spent 3 decades as a criminal defense lawyer, and I can tell you, I have seen heartbreak come in all colors, genders, sizes, and shapes. And it's the heartbreak of trying to use the criminal law, the most awesome use of government power, for the purpose of regulating what people put into their bodies. And it's a disgrace, and we have to do something about it. And I want to, first of all, thank and commend Denzel for sharing his story. It is not easy. Getting arrested, getting prosecuted, getting put into a prison cell, being separated from your family, being scarred for life with a criminal conviction is trauma. And that trauma doesn't just go away overnight, if it ever does. And so for him to come up here and share his story is really some great sacrifice, a personal sacrifice, which I appreciate. Now ponder this. There are literally millions of Denzels out there on our planet, millions of them. There are tens of thousands of people who are still in prison for cannabis and probably hundreds of thousands if you include other drugs. And there are millions and millions who carry the scar of a criminal conviction. And depending upon what a particular country's laws look like, that scar can keep you out of jobs, out of housing, out of custody of your children. It can cause you to be deported. It's a scar that doesn't go away, ever. So imagine that there's a way to help those people. Imagine that there's a way to make sure that as this burgeoning industry takes off, we don't leave behind and forget the millions of Denzels out there. Well, there is such a project. It's worked in the United States, and we want to see it work globally. And I'm just going to show you very briefly what it is. It's a way to make sure that we don't, as this wonderful industry takes off, as it does what the power of the plant is unleashed to do good for so many people, we have to be able to rectify what was done bad to so many people. So what will the project do? It will work on all aspects of the problem. It will seek clemency, which can be a pardon or a commutation that gives people back their freedom or relief from the consequences of a conviction. It can be to make sure that records are sealed or expunged. It's reentry, as Mary said, that they've devoted so many resources to helping people come back and get their lives back in order. It's policy reform versus via litigation or via advocacy to make sure that as these laws are passed, we're not forgetting about these people who were left behind. And that has been a problem in many of the states in the U.S. that have legalized. They haven't taken care of the people that were left behind. They were forgotten. It's no good to the person who has a conviction, to the person who's still sitting in jail. Legalization is nothing unless there's retroactive relief. As Mary alluded to, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, the basis of this project is to do the research that's necessary to work with partners like Release, partners that are already in this field, not to reinvent, but to bring these resources together and develop a program, the linchpin of which will be volunteer lawyers. And they will come up and they will participate in droves. I was part of a clemency project in the United States under the Obama administration. And when that administration said, we're going to consider granting commutations to long-serving prisoners in nonviolent offenses, which of course is all drug offenses, we had over 5,000 lawyers volunteer for that project. And I am telling you that if we can start this globally, we will have lawyers all over the globe that will sign up to do this good work. Who benefits? Well, obviously, people who are still in jail will benefit, but so will the people who have the records. So will minority communities. Families will benefit. Communities will benefit. We have to undo the harm that's been done. It is truly a moral obligation as the industry grows that we do this. So that's what I'm here to talk about. We need your support. Candidly, we need about $250,000 US to get this started. But I guarantee you that if we get this started, you will be doing and you will see a lot of good come to a lot of people. So with that, I'm going to close my remarks, and we're going to have a message from Steve D'Angelo, who could not be here, but wanted to share his thoughts. Some people have talked about Steve as the father of the legal cannabis industry, and I'm proud to ask the booth to play that film. And this is our contact.
Hello, friend.
You can find us later. We'll be at the reception.
My name is Steve D'Angelo. I fell in love with cannabis as a very young man, and since then have devoted my life to telling the truth about the plant. That mission has led me to become an activist, entrepreneur, author, and educator, as well as a defendant, prisoner, parolee, and felon. I've played an important role in legalizing cannabis, but am best known for creating several cannabis industry firsts. Harborside, the first gold standard cannabis retail; Steep Hill, the first cannabis analytics company; ArcView, the first cannabis investment company; and the National Cannabis Industry Association, the first cannabis trade association. In honor of those achievements, Willie Brown, the legendary former mayor of San Francisco and Speaker of the California Assembly, in 2014 called me the father of the legal cannabis industry. In 2016, the voters of California legalized cannabis for adult use in a voter initiative. In 2017, like many California cannabis executives, I found myself in Toronto, Canada, seeking growth capital. One afternoon, I found myself on the top floor of a tall skyscraper in the financial district, sitting at a conference table with people who controlled hundreds of millions of dollars, reviewing spreadsheets that envisioned all of us growing and selling tons and tons of cannabis. Everybody at that table was very happy. Then my phone started vibrating. I wouldn't normally interrupt such an important meeting, but in this case, it was my friend Chuck, calling from a prison in Pennsylvania where he had been imprisoned for 4 years for transporting a mere 14 pounds of cannabis into the state. So I ducked out into the hallway and I took the call. And it was grim, because it's always grim to talk to your friends in prison. You can hear the clang of metal and the arguments of other prisoners and guards barking orders and the weariness in your friend's voice. It's just grim. That grimness was still clinging to me when I went back into the conference room where everybody else was still feeling very rosy. And I took a look at all those spreadsheets and thought about all the dollars they represented. And I knew two things right away. The first was that I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror in the morning if I didn't do something for Chuck and all the other people still in prison for exactly the same thing that I was doing, the same thing that everybody at that table was doing. And the other thing I knew immediately was that if we could just scoop a little bit off the top of those spreadsheets, and from all the spreadsheets and all the other rooms where I knew similar conversations were going on, we could actually get the job done. We could raise enough money to make sure that everybody in prison on cannabis charges is released. That vision became real in 2019 with the launch of the Last Prisoner Project at a backyard party at my friend Jim Belushi's house in Hollywood. The LPP mission was and remains simple: to ensure that as the legal cannabis industry is built, every single cannabis prisoner on the planet is released. Since 2019, thanks to a remarkable level of support from the cannabis industry and consumers, LPP has grown into one of the most important cannabis advocacy organizations active today. Our efforts have led to or been part of the release of hundreds of prisoners and the expungement of thousands of criminal records. Those prisoners include people like Michael Thompson, formerly the longest-serving nonviolent prisoner in the state of Michigan, and Richard DeLisi, formerly the longest-serving nonviolent prisoner in the United States. Both of these men served close to 30 years in prison before being released. While working for release, LPP provides financial support to prisoners and their families, and after our constituents are released, we make sure that they can find housing and employment. One of the pillars of LPP's success has been its relationship with another one of my good friends, Norman Reimer. Norman is now serving as global CEO of Fair Trials, but when he and I first met, he was the executive director of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Under his leadership, the NACDL joined with LPP to create the Cannabis Justice Initiative, which mobilizes the U.S. legal community to recruit, train, and support volunteer lawyers who are then matched with cannabis prisoners to seek relief from their imprisonment. Key to the success of the initiative has been generous donations from legal cannabis companies and consumers nationwide. In the past couple of years, as we've seen a wave of news stories featuring released LPP constituents, cannabis executives and investors who support LPP have told me about the deep satisfaction and great sense of pride that has come from knowing that they are not just improving their consumers' lives with beneficial cannabis products, they're also helping secure liberty and justice for the pioneers of this industry, for people who should never have been arrested, who never should have been made to suffer the consequences of a conviction. Today, the legal industry is enjoying rapid international growth. More and more countries are reforming their laws, and those reforms are giving birth to new companies. And those companies are now busy creating new prosperity. But almost everywhere this new legal industry is being born, prisoners still remain incarcerated for exactly the same activities. Nobody knows how many there are for sure. That's part of the problem. But we do know that worldwide, it's orders of magnitude larger than the 40,000 plus prisoners we still have in the United States. Can you imagine being one of those people? Can you imagine how it would feel to sit in a cell, to look out and see other people legally building businesses, people who are in some cases making massive amounts of wealth, people doing exactly the same thing that you're sitting in prison for? If that image makes you as sad and angry as it makes me, please consider supporting fair trials and LPP as we expand the Cannabis Justice Initiative to all parts of the globe. Fair Trials, with its global reach as the world's criminal justice watchdog, is uniquely positioned to build and house the infrastructure that's going to be needed to follow through on the LPP promise in Europe, in Latin America, and beyond. Norman Reimer is an exceptional leader, a proven ally with a solid track record of accomplishment. He's done this before, and he knows how to do it again. And LPP will be standing by to support him every day in any way and every way he needs. And all of us here in this room and in all of the rooms our new industry is meeting in, no matter where we come from or what our role in the industry is, surely can agree on one thing, that nobody deserves to be in prison on cannabis charges. But make no mistake, this is a big job. Getting people out of prison is a lot more difficult than putting them in prison. It's only going to happen if all of us participate, each and every single one of us. So I urge you, please, reach out to Norman Reimer and his colleagues at Fair Trials. Learn more about how you and the companies you're involved with can support this exciting new effort. In fact, if you want to, you can meet Norman and his team right now at our drinks reception starting this moment. I hope you do that. I thank you very much for your kind attention, your future support. Be well, be free, and stay strong.